So I'm charged with sharing a U.S. perspective, and rather than try to squeeze a comprehensive overview of the U.S. choice system into 5 minutes, I'm just going to try to provoke the conversation by sharing some sort of organizing frameworks, otherwise known as lists. And before I start, I would just say and sort of echo Melinda's comments in our last panel, how struck I am by the parallels across our systems. And I think the reason for that is that the systemic obstacles and forces that we are contending with are very much universal. So let me first say that I'm going to back up a little bit and try to talk about two different dimensions of choice. And then in a moment, I'll talk a little bit about access, and I want to talk about three different components of access. And the three of you have largely talked about access and admissions. In the US context, and I think probably here as well, you really can't decouple the question of access from a review of the quality and range of schools from which families can choose. And so broadly, I'm going to talk about choice within the US public school system through two lenses. The first being supply, or maybe we would say options, and the second being demand or access. And the great challenge, which we don't have enough time to even start to scratch the surface on today, is how you can get those two things to match up in the right way so that the best possible schools are there to serve the students who need them the most. On the option side of things, as context, in the US, school reform over the last couple of decades has really been driven by at least two factors. One is certainly low rates of student achievement, but there's also been a philosophical shift from the idea of standardization or that there be a single national model of what school should look like to the belief that there really needs to be a spectrum or range of options that families can make informed choices to attend. And this is, of course, nothing new for affluent families in the US who have their choice of which private schools they want to send their kids to and say, oh, little Saskia is kind of a free thinker, we're going to send her to Montessori, but her brother really needs a much more structured environment, and so we're instead going to send him here. So in our country, the only folks who don't have those kinds of choices are more low-income, disconnected communities where kids are generally sent default into whatever the school pathway is. And so there's been a lot of movement to try to change the landscape of school options. The easiest way to kind of categorize that landscape is from a structural or governance perspective. So that would be thinking about community schools managed by school districts, and then charter schools, which are also public schools, but where the schools have basically, in exchange for autonomies and flexibilities around things like school organization, hiring, and budget, really more procurement than budget, but that's another story, except increased accountability for student results. But I would just sort of caution a note here that it's somewhat reductive to think exclusively about charters versus community schools as some sort of a dichotomy. And we've heard this today as folks have talked about the different performance levels of different academy operators here. It's certainly the same case in the US. The problem of thinking just about charters or community schools is that it really masks critical aspects of the school experience, a wide range in instructional philosophies around teaching and learning, the kinds of structures that are in place in schools to foster personalization and relationships. It's easy to think about that as small schools or large schools, but there are lots of large schools that are organized in ways that still personalize the experience. How schools balance their emphasis between academic development and then socio-emotional growth. And then even things like the length of the school day and year. There's a lot of variety around any one of those things and many other dimensions of the school experience, both within the charter sector and within community schools in the US. And while we don't have good taxonomies to categorize schools along those qualitative dimensions, I do think that it's just important to call them out if we really want to get under the hood of schools that are having outsized gains with the students that we care the most about. So let me shift, in the interest of time, to this question of access. And, so as we've attempted to move toward a landscape that really has a broad array of school options in the states, which is most certainly a work in progress, there is a sister question about how to ensure equitable and viable pathways for students to avail themselves of those options. And one of the challenges in the US that we tend to narrowly define access in terms of enrollment policies. But I would posit, and this heuristic here is just my attempt to encourage us to think about the entitlement that is access to the best possible school for you, being far more complex than just whether you can get in or not. And so I'm gonna start at the top and sort of move counterclockwise around this circle to talk about these three different pieces: the admissions, who gets in, paired with this second circle that's labeled transfers and discharges, which is, a question of whether schools actually keep the students who arrive to them. In the U.S., when schools are cherry picking the students they serve, we say that they cream. You can cream on the way in, and then you can also sort of exit the students who are most problematic. And then the third bubble here, which I've labeled program equity, I think is deeply important and something that we don't think enough about when we're talking about access. And the question here is really whether every student in a building, irrespective of their background and their academic history, has the same shot at accessing the full instructional experience that a school has on offer. And so in the US, what it can look like when this isn't happening is that there are groups of students who are disproportionately excluded from school activities because they're being suspended at higher rates, and so they're spending large amounts of time outside of the class. This can also mean, very tracked schools where those tracks are quite rigid, and if you're a lower performing student, you're receiving one set of coursework that is quite different than what the highest performing kid in the building would receive. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Saskia.